right. So if you could please get your paper labeled, that would be great. And my little window now popped up. All right, so again, lesson 10, make a table from an equation and write an equation from a table. This is going to build on that work that we did, that we've been doing the last couple of weeks about slope and y-intercept. And your learning target today is I can complete a table using an equation and write an equation when given a table. I'm going to ask you to follow the lesson, take notes as we get them, and then you do have a worksheet for today as well. All right, lesson 10. All right, here we go. So the first thing that we have to do is get some basic information taken care of. Today we're going to talk about the slope-intercept form of equations. This is one form of equations that you will see a lot of between now and the end of this unit and throughout the rest of the school year. The slope-intercept form is pretty easy to work with, and it actually is very straightforward and gives us a lot of information for what we need. So the slope-intercept form of an equation, we do write it as y equals mx plus b. And in just a moment, I'll show you what all of those parts are. So again, on the left side of your paper, let's write slope-intercept form. And then over here on the right side, go ahead and write this equation, y equals mx plus b. And it is color coordinated for a specific reason, and that's just to help make sure for me to reinforce kind of where each part comes from. So as we look at it, the first thing that we need to understand, or that's important to understand, is that the m, this letter next to the x, is our slope of that equation. Okay, we talked about finding slope the last couple of weeks. We've done it from a table, we've done it from a graph, we've done it from coordinate pairs. But today we're going to talk specifically about tables and slope-intercept form. Notice we're going to use the letter m to represent slope, and it's directly next to x. And so anytime we have both of those numbers, we would multiply those two numbers together. B is the y-intercept. Okay, B is the y-intercept. We talked about that last week as well. Remember, the y-intercept is where x is 0. And if I plugged a 0 in for x here, anything times 0 is 0. And then when you add it to b, it gives you that b. So that's the y-intercept. And then in this case, in the slope-intercept form of the equation, we're actually going to keep x and y as variables. They are not going to change. Okay, they're going to stay the letter x and stay the letter y. The only time that those might change to a number is if you have a coordinate pair and you need to find either slope or y-intercept, then you might plug in a number. But for now, we're going to understand that x and y are variables, but they do come from coordinate pairs, the xy coordinate pair. All right, so with equations, we know that we can write equations from a table. And so the next part I'm going to show you are the steps for writing an equation in slope-intercept form, again, when you're given a table. All right, so our first step is this. You're going to use what you know in the table, and you're going to find the rise and the run. So we're going to find our slope. And again, I'll show you an example of looking at a table and finding the slope from that. We've already done that, so that part of today is not new. The new part is taking those numbers and plugging them into an equation and writing it in slope-intercept form. So again, the first thing you're going to do is find your m, or your slope, and you're going to do that by finding the rise. Rise goes with y's, so the change in the y coordinates and the change in the x coordinates. Then you're going to look in that table and you're going to find the y-intercept. And remember, we talked about the fact that we look at a table for where x is 0, and the number that's with that 0 is what we call that y-intercept. So we're going to use the letter B to represent that. And then once you have found both your slope and your y-intercept, then all you're going to do is plug those numbers into that general equation, and you're going to write it in y equals mx plus b form. Again, we call this form of the equation, we call this slope-intercept form. And again, it's because m is slope and b is that y-intercept. I'm going to ask you that when you have everything on this slide and you're ready for me to go on to the next one, if you could click the raise hand button so I know that you are ready for me to move on, I would appreciate it. Hey, again, get these notes written down, and then when you're all set, click your little raise hand button so I know that we are ready to move on, please. That was my foot.
They're hurting me up.
All right, about 15 more seconds to finish this slide, and then we'll move on into our first example. All right, put that bad boy back there. Move on in here to example number 1. So on the left-hand side of your paper, go ahead and write these directions. For example 1, we're going to complete the table for this equation. Go ahead and click the raise hand button again to remove that. And then when we're done with this example, I'll have you raise your hand again when you're caught up. So again, we're going to complete the table for this equation, y equals negative 2x plus 3. And again, as I mentioned on the previous slide when we were talking about it, keep in mind that when there's a number next to a letter, that means to multiply. All right, so what you're going to do when you're asked to complete the table, with today's assignment, the tables are going to be set up for you for the most part, but then you're going to fill in the Y values for those tables. The other thing that you're going to notice on my example is I've got a space here for us to show our work. I don't have that on today's worksheet, but I would ask that you show me how you get those values. In the event that you make a mistake, I can help you figure out what that misconception is. The other thing that you're going to notice as you are working on today's assignment is all of the values are given to you in the X column, just like I have here. So go ahead and copy this on your paper. If for some reason the X column is blank and the directions tell you to go ahead and fill in that table, you can pick any numbers that you want in that X column. You're just going to see the ones that I have set up for you. They are already done, and those numbers are relatively small and easy to work with. When you have to put your own values in for X, I really would suggest that you keep the numbers relatively small and easy to work with. So I'll let you get this copied, and then I will move on. We'll move on shortly, and I'll show you how to fill it in. I can't. I have to work today.
I just want to go to Creole.
I understand that. I can't go.
The granddad mask's
All right, so as I mentioned, when we have an equation and we've got this number next to a variable, you're going to take the X value and plug it into that equation for the X, and then you're going to find the Y value. So as I do that, I'm going to take this -2, and it's going in place of X right here in the equation. So I take the X out and I put that -2 in its place. And then basically I just figure out what that answer is. So I'm going to do -2 times -2 to make +4. And then +4 plus 3 does give us 7. And then as you'll notice, each step of the way, the only thing that changes from one line to the next is this number right here. And the number after the -2 is the number that we're plugging in for X. So -2 times -1 plus 3 is 5. -2 times 0 plus 3 is 3. And then as we continue the table, there you go. So I'll give you a moment to get that table copied down and filled in. And if you have questions, feel free to ask them. They're closed on Mondays.
Wait, today's a Monday?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. They open at 11.
We can still go, right? Yeah, we can go! Wait, is it a Monday? Is it a Monday, Dad, Mama?
Today is Monday.
We can go, Dad, we can go! I wanted to go! Daddy.
We got rid of the first responder discount. All right, so the one thing that I want to point out to you in this table is not only do we fill in the table, but there is a way for you to check to see what's going on here. So one thing that I want to point out to you is if we take a look at the Y column, what do you notice is happening here to go from 7 to 5 to 3 to -1 and so on? What do we see happening? Yeah. Thank you, Dylan. So it's decreasing right here, right? The X column is decreasing to 0 and then increases. My question was, what's happening in the Y column? We should hopefully recognize that it's going by 2 in the Y column. And then if we take a look at the X column, as Dylan said, it's increasing, and it's increasing by 1. So if we think of slope that we talked about previous, our slope is -2/1, which just turns into -2. And wanted to point this out to you. There is that -2, right? That's our slope. That's our M, whatever letter or number is next to the X. The other thing that we know is we've talked about is y-intercept. We talked about the y-intercept as being where X equals 0. So you can find that in the table, and there's your 0, 3. And here it is there, and right there as well. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next example. The next example, we're going to take a look at a table, and we're going to write an equation from the table. We're going to use those same ideas that we've talked about in previous lessons in terms of finding both the slope and the y-intercept. So again, the directions are going to be to write an equation for the given table. If you wrote the steps for writing an equation down in that first slide we talked about, this is just a repeat of those directions so we have them. And then before we do anything else, I'm going to ask you to copy this table down on your paper, and we'll walk through how we can write that equation together. $21, Drew.
What? To do what?
Go to Crayola Experience.
$20.
Mm-hmm.
Dad, you can do that.
Or you get him a pass for 35.
I don't do that. This was a hard one.
Or you can get each of yourselves a pass for 35 and not get me one because mine as teachers are still free.
I think it's 35.
All right. All right. So hopefully you copied that table down. So as I said, the very first step that we're going to do is find the slope, which means we're going to find both the rise and the run. So again, rise goes with y's. So we're going to take a look at what's happening in the y column and figuring out how it's changing here. So as you look at the y column, what do we notice is happening? Yeah, it's increasing by 3, right? So we say that our rise is 3, and then we take a look at that x column. And we see here, in this case, this is increasing by 1. So our run is 1, and so our slope turns into 3. And then for our y-intercept, we take a look at the table. We find where x is 0, and our y-intercept is 0. 0, -1. So then what we can do, I'm going to write those both in here. I've got my y-intercept of 0, -1. And once you identify both the slope and the y-intercept, the rest is pretty straightforward because you're just going to replace those letters, that M and the B, you're going to replace them with the 3 and the -1. So let's write that equation in there. The box is kind of in the way. There we go. So we'll write that equation. Again, it's going to start with y equals mx plus b. That means we're going to put the 3 and x. And then you can either do plus -1 or you can simply just do -1 because it's a -1 here. If this y-intercept had been a positive number, then you would have put plus whatever that number is. Okay. When you have this example completed and everything written down that you're ready for, go ahead and click the raise hand button again so I know if we are ready to move on to our closure and then the next steps. Oops. Ooh, where did all my writing go? Weird. Y equals, this should be 3x minus 1. I don't know where all my writing went. And your y-intercept is 0. Oops, different color. 0, -1. All right, again, click the little raise hand button when you are ready for me to move on so we can get to our closure and then get you started on today's assignment. For those of you, if you've looked at your quiz or you didn't take your quiz yet, actually today, this particular example is a really good reminder also about how to find slope and y-intercept from your table. So it might be a good idea to use, have these notes out in front of you as well as you do those test corrections. We have about 30 more seconds to get everything written down. All right, so as I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, we just had 2 examples today. One is filling out the table with a given equation, and then the other one is write an equation from a table. So that being said, here's your closure. So to write an equation in slope-intercept form, what 2 values do you need? Go ahead and click the little raise hand button again to remove the raise hand. Give you a minute to write that down. Your sentence starter could be something like, to write an equation in slope-intercept form, I need, and then write the rest of it.
Brother, I know you read that. I know, you're in there.
All right, hopefully your sentence says something to the effect of that you need both the slope and the y-intercept to write your equation in slope-intercept form. All right, so moving on, your assignment for today, if you head into Schoology, you might need to refresh your screen. I believe the folder is purple. Go ahead and open up that lesson 10 worksheet. If you have a printer at home, feel free to print it off. Otherwise, the expectation is to copy the problems on your notebook paper and solve them. And then when you're finished, you're going to post a picture of your completed assignment on your DUR. As a heads up, if you can either, we haven't used our DUR at all because everything's been in Desmos. So you can either go to Google, like your Google Drive, and type in DUR and look for DUR4. Or if you head into Schoology and look at I'm going to show this just by the student perspective to find it. Ooh-wee, serious lag. All right, so you can go into Schoology, and then also to find your DUR, you can head to the very first folder of this unit, the one that says Lessons 1 and 2. Open that up, and then in the Lesson 1 folder, you will see, this is slow. Try it this way. In the lesson 1 folder, you should, if you open that up, you will see the DUR in the red lesson 1 folder. It's right here, DUR 4. Okay, so again, when you're finished with that assignment, either go to your Google Drive and search DUR 4 or come to that lesson 1 folder and you will find it there. So the rest of class time is for you to work on that particular assignment, or if you want to look at your quiz from last week, either finish the quiz or do some test corrections, you can do that also.